Thank you all for coming. Especially thank you to our fabulous panelists. We're going to go in the order on the program. So we're going to start with Sarah Bishop. Are you ready for this?
I'm ready.
Sarah graduated magna cum laude from Northwestern in 2003 with a BA in English Literature. She then completed her Ph.D. in English at the University of Virginia in 2012. She has held positions in grant development at the Hall Center and Johnson County Community College. She was Chief Communications and Development Officer at the Lawrence Art Center when I first found her and convinced her to come to one of these panels as a community person so that we didn't just have KU people. And then she returned to the Hall Center 2 years ago as Associate Director, and she is now plotting her next move, and a lot of people are going to miss her here at KU, including me.
Nice.
So,
Nice.
All four of the panelists, ahead of time, I gave them 4 questions to talk about, but I will let you go. But if you could just take 8 to 10 minutes and talk about the questions and your thoughts, and then we'll move on. And then at the end, Q&A, conversation, whatever we want.
Awesome. Okay, well, hi. Nice to see all of you. I know Usmain from boot camp, which I will talk about briefly. But yes, I'm currently the Associate Director of the Hall Center for the Humanities and Co-Director of the Institute for Digital Research in the Humanities, but only for 2 more days. And then I'm taking 6 weeks off to figure out what I want to do next, which is something I would highly suggest to people if you can make it possible. I think if you can afford to do it and take a little time to think about what you're doing in life over the course of life, it's really worthwhile, and I'm very, very excited about it. But the questions, to get right down to the questions. So the first question that Bruce had for us was, what do you know now that you wish you'd known when you were starting out in graduate school? Many things. The answer to that question is many things. Some of them personal things about just growing up where you're like, oh, well, I completely didn't understand that years ago. But some of them professional things, like the fact that there are many things you can do with the Ph.D. besides being a professor. Many opportunities for you out in the world. It is true that having a Ph.D. in the humanities does not particularly count for much in the non-academic world without experience. But if you compare it with experience, I think it's super valuable, and people really recognize that, and you can move up really quickly. I also think one thing that I completely failed to take advantage of are university resources. Universities have so many wonderful training resources. They have a career center. They have all kinds of free online tech training courses. It's just really incredible what universities have inside and outside of your discipline. So take advantage of that while you're here and try to get into those resources. Try to get into some of those training classes. Make connections that maybe you think would be of interest to you outside of your field. So I would say those are things that I didn't really understand. To prepare the second question. What can students be doing now to prepare for a career in public humanities? Okay, well, so public humanities is the sort of non-academic side of the humanities. It's really growing. It's becoming increasingly popular. People are very interested in it because we know that while here in the university, we all have a fairly good understanding of what the humanities are and what they include, like what disciplines, history, English, French, all the literatures, right? We know that in the public, outside of the university, some people don't even understand what the word means. And so when it comes down to the time for people to vote on things that are related to the humanities, so support for the National Endowment for the Humanities at the federal level, support for higher institutions of higher education at the state level, it's really important that they understand what the humanities are and why they benefit us. And so the public humanities is really all about that. So taking the sort of high-level research that's going on at universities and bringing it out into the public in a way that's accessible. And it's actually very hard for a lot of academics to do. So they're not used to speaking about their research in a way that people who are not experts in their field can really understand. And so that's something that we are working on a lot at the Hall Center. And it's something for you all to think about as well as you're developing as scholars. If you're thinking about that alternate path, keep working on those communication skills. Look for opportunities to practice your communication of your research to others so that you start to get a good sense of sort of what general knowledge is, so the sort of general knowledge in the public, and then can speak from that perspective to that perspective. I'd also say get experience now means volunteering a lot of the time and getting internships and working part-time if you can. I know it's really hard because you're so busy and you're working on all kinds of stuff. But if you can get experience while you're in grad school, you'll be set up much better to succeed after graduating. I didn't do a great job of that when I was in grad school. I did do some editing on the side. I did some copywriting on the side, which was really helpful. So advertising copywriting. Imagine Ph.D. is a database that we have free access to here for all of you as KU students that allows you to explore different career options, and it has some really wonderful surveys that you can take that help you assess your skills and interests. And that can be really helpful if you're kind of like, I know I don't really want to be a professor, but I don't really know what I should be doing. So taking those surveys, it's also kind of fun. It's kind of like taking like a personality quiz or something. I don't know, it's kind of enjoyable. And then you can it matches you with different skills and interests, and then it has wonderful resources to take you to actual job boards related to those interests. And then it also has all kinds of materials about how to craft your CV, how to write your cover letter, all kinds of stuff like that. So super useful. We talk about it in boot camp. So boot camp is a 1-week intensive where we do professional skills for humanities PhDs for outside of academia, right? So learning those skills for outside of academia. It is always the week after finals. The deadline is March 2nd. So if you want to apply, please do. March 2nd through the Hall Center website. You can find information about it at hallcenter.ku.edu. It's a pretty fun. Usmain, pretty fun? I'm counting on you, Usmain.
Self-assessment, like assessing yourself. I think some of the things that are sleeping in you, like qualities that I wouldn't imagine, or just even,
Yeah.
doing my thing, just kind of,
So we get to wake up.
Yeah.
Yeah. So please, we would love for you to apply. Also, it's a week. You have to commit yourself for a week, but it's, you're doing group work. You're doing, we do a field trip day, which is really fun. And the best part is you get paid $500. So we're actually paying you to do the training. So like, why not? Why not? Like, you'll get training and you don't pay for it, you get paid. So I say go for it. Also due on March 2nd are our Applied Humanities Fellowships. So these are summer fellowships that match you with a nonprofit that's related to the humanities in some way. So partners that we commonly have are the Lawrence Public Library, the Kansas City Public Library, the Mid-America Arts Council, the Kansas State Historical Society, Freedom's Frontier. So all kinds of sort of arts and culture-based nonprofits in the region. And you get paid $3,000 over the course of the summer to do work for them. So it's a great deal. All of the positions are very humanities-based, so you're using your humanities research and skills, but you're also getting sort of real-world professional experience that you can put on your resume. So again, March 2nd, that's the day to remember. So skills and knowledge that I acquired. I mean, you all have wonderful research skills, writing skills, presentation skills, communication skills. Oh, yes, you do. I don't believe it. Curriculum development skills, I actually think, are something that, not just for if you're going to go be a teacher in a public school, right? The curriculum development, I think, just for training people in groups and sort of the kind of way that enables you to present new information to groups is very useful in the professional world for all kinds of things. So you're developing excellent skills.
So this is part of the boot camp?
You do develop some of these skills in the boot camp, yes, but you're also just developing them now while you are humanities graduate students. But in the boot camp, you will learn some skills you probably do not get while you're a humanities graduate student, like budgeting, like how to use Excel. Who can use Excel? Yeah. You actually have to use Excel all the time, and when I first got into the nonprofit world, I was faced, like, they sent me a budget, we're like, edit this, and I was like, oh my god, I can't, like, get out of the cell, like, I couldn't, like, I didn't know what I was doing, it was very frightening, but I learned. But you can learn now, there's training on Excel for free. Go take a class. They're so nice over there in IT, and they will train you how to do Excel, and it's great, they're awesome. I think graphic design, that's what we do a little bit with Adobe Spark in the boot camp, but that's something you can get free training on here at the university. I think video editing, that's another thing you can get free training on or get practice on while you're here at the university. Marketing and fundraising, a little harder to get practice on, but you can definitely do it if you partner with a nonprofit and do some volunteer work. They need that kind of stuff all the time. Pros and cons about my career choice. This is the final question. The final question. Pros are that I think when I was in academia, I didn't really understand about academia that so much of it is working alone and at a desk. And I really like working collaboratively in teams to lead projects, and so that's something I've learned about myself and that I really enjoy in all of the jobs that I've had since leaving graduate school. I think also designing events for the public I find to be very rewarding because people learn so much, and it's so fascinating to sort of see them have their eyes open to new information. I like building relationships, and I like being able to see the change that I'm making. So I think in academia it can be a long time, right? You write a research article, but then, it doesn't really make an impact on the field for years because people have to take time to read it, right? And like then they have to do their own research to kind of see the change realized. But you can see change really happen quickly when you're in the non-academic world. So you can lead a large, lecture and really see that it's impacting people in a new way. The cons are that I really miss teaching. I love teaching. I don't get to teach anymore, but you could always try to adjunct or find some way to teach something as a volunteer or something like that. So that's it for me.
Excellent. All right. Next up, we jump over to Megan Belaire. Megan graduated with degrees in French and German at the University of Arkansas in 2014. We then were smart enough to recruit her to our MA program in French, which she completed in 2016. Since graduating, she's held a number of positions, including being a lecturer for our department, working for the Alliance Française de Kansas City, the Applied English Center, and since August of 2018 as a graduate academic advisor for COGA. Megan.
Like you said, a lot of those are personal lessons. I wish I would have known to prioritize my mental health more.
Yeah.
But keeping it professional, just how many resources there are. Sarah kind of stole a lot of my stuff, so.
Oh, I'm sorry.
This happens every time. Every panel, this happens. So I flip a coin to figure out who's going to start.
Right. I'll have to bribe you next time. I'm going first. No, but just how many resources there are at the university. I think for the most part they do a pretty good job of advertising them, but then certain things just you don't realize they're there. So talking to people, figuring out what you can do. The other thing that I wish I had known is just how important networking is. I mean, people had told me networking is important, but I kind of hate networking.
Alexander.
I can tell you, I don't hate it.
Most people kind of hate it.
I was going to say, everyone kind of hates it. Yeah. It really is, though, because I think a lot of the opportunities that I've had have come about just because I knew someone and they mentioned something and then I went for it, and the Alliance Française job was definitely a friend in the graduate program that thought of me, and I thought I would be a good person for that. And so just realizing how important networking is. So what can you be doing right now to prepare for a career in public humanities? Network. And so by that you can join organizations, go to different events on campus, go to lectures, and then when you're there, the way that I've had to look at networking for me to be okay with it is just getting to know people, with no expectation of anything in return or for them helping my career, but just kind of getting to know people and what they like, what they dislike, what they're passionate about. And for me, so I find getting to know people really interesting, the human experience. I'm a humanities major after all, right? So for me, that way it's a little bit more fun. And then when I know what people are passionate about, then I can think about them when I'm working on a project and let them know. And then usually if I think of them, they think of me, and it just kind of spirals from there. But that was something that I had some special circumstances during my graduate degree, but I just didn't really have the opportunity to do a lot of networking and go to a lot of events. Taking advantage of workshops, so IT, I don't think it's really highly advertised that students can take advantage of the IT workshops. I think most people just assume they're for staff and faculty, but students, especially grad students, are more than welcome to take IT. Yeah.
It's now required in this class.
Oh.
Formalize it.
I stopped suggesting and started requiring.
You will definitely benefit from that. Like, you know, they have Excel, Adobe Spark, like all kinds of things. And the other thing too is, like, even if you know how to use those programs, if you've gone to an actual workshop, then you have proof to a future employer that you know how to use those things. So let's see, skills that I acquired during graduate school. So research, I think, is really important, but I think part of it too is, like, you just, as a graduate student, as anybody doing research, you have to learn how to be thorough and how to keep looking at different sources and looking at different perspectives and taking them all into account. And something that I realized after I left graduate school is that that's not really something that a lot of people are skilled at. You know, I've run into a lot of, like, you know, people that are in really high up positions that just don't have that level of detail or consideration. And I think that's definitely a strength of mine and anybody that's done graduate school. Just kind of realizing how important research is, like, especially for the interviewing process. I did a lot of research each time that I went to interview for any kind of position, and I usually got comments about, like, how thorough my knowledge of that institution was, or, you know, things like that. That really made me stand out in interviews. I'd also say Intro to Graduate Studies made me a lot more critical of my career path. Before I came to grad school, I just assumed that I was just gonna, you know, be a professor. I didn't realize there were other options, or, you know, I figured if I did pursue other options, it would be a complete waste of the time that I had in grad school. And I'm seeing now that that's not the case, that my time in grad school actually made me really competitive and really well-rounded for other careers. So let's see, skills I didn't acquire. I am kicking myself that I didn't do the boot camp. I really wanted to. Yeah.
Sarah and I tried. We tried to convince people. We tried to sell it.
And, you know, the internships over the summer too, because the big thing is, it took me about a year after graduate school to find, like, that first job, and thankfully I was able to be a lecturer for the department, and I love teaching, so that was great. But since I didn't do internships or join organizations during graduate school, I didn't necessarily have a lot of those connections or, like, proof to people that I could do things outside of researching French literature. And so I wish that I would have taken advantage of some of those opportunities a bit more, like been able to put those things on my CV. And as, like, a young staff person at KU, I've been taking advantage of literally everything that I can to get as many things on my CV, and it's been paying off really well. So let's see, career choice, pros and cons. So I'm a graduate academic advisor right now, but in general, just, like, working in alternative academic careers, I would say some of the pros are you have a flexible schedule for the most part. I've found that you really have the ability to be creative if you want, and you have opportunities to kind of, like, to make your own opportunities. I also personally feel a sense of purpose in giving back in working in the university system, and specifically with graduate students. Grad school was a really difficult period of time in my life for various reasons, and so the idea that I'm able to kind of help other graduate students get through that time in their lives is just really rewarding for me. And I also know how important it was for me to have support systems, you know, like Bruce or whatever.
Oh, so nice.
Not to make it too sentimental. And then I still feel like I use my international knowledge and my language skills. Even though I'm not speaking French, something that you learn by learning a second language is just different ways of communicating, right? Because the way you say something in English is different than the way you say it in French or whatever other language. And so I think you get really good at learning how to explain the same thing in different ways, which is really useful because people respond to language differently and they have different ways of learning and communicating, and so you become a lot more adaptable, I think, than monolingual speakers. And then my department, I'm with the chemistry department, and we are 50% international students this year. And so I still get to use like my knowledge of, you know, what it's like coming to a new country, and my limited knowledge of like visa issues and things like that. So that's been pretty cool. For cons, I'm not making a lot of money. What? Surprise! I know. You all thought you were going to be millionaires. I also, I feel like, especially in higher education, a lot of people are overworked and underpaid. Part of that has to do with budgeting, but I also think that a lot of people that work in higher education are really passionate and they really care about the students, and so often they'll put themselves in situations where they're doing a lot more than they're being paid for or that they need to, because they want to make sure that the students are taken care of. And so I think working in higher education it's often easy to get taken advantage of. You really have to be vocal about, you know, these are my boundaries. If you want to have a work-life balance, you have to be really vocal about it, because otherwise, and I mean, I think you find this in the private sector too. I'm not saying this is just higher ed, but you know, if you keep saying yes to things and not expecting anything in return, people will keep asking you to do things and not give you anything in return. And I also feel like sometimes in higher education, since a lot of us are really idealistic, and you know, I think there's a lot more like passion that comes into play in like a higher ed background than maybe in the private sector. And so sometimes I feel like it's relatively easy to run into coworkers with poor boundaries that you have to kind of, you know, navigate. So that's what I would say, pros and cons for the current position that I'm in right now. So
say this, these 4 people have enriched my life, and I have known all of them for at least some time and in different contexts, and I'm a huge fan of them or I wouldn't have invited them. But Laura Leonard and I go back. Laura Leonard has been in my life since I moved to Lawrence, Kansas to begin a job at the University of Kansas. When my kids were little, their favorite place to trick-or-treat was Laura's house because Laura loaded them up. And now the kids are in college, so go figure. Laura Leonard earned her BA, her MA, and her PhD in French at KU.
Triple threat.
Trifecta. Since 2011, she has served as an academic advisor and then senior academic advisor for the College Advising Center. She has just begun, all you people changing all your position titles, she has just begun a new position at the Office of Study Abroad and Global Engagement, what I used to call OSA, but is now SAGE. My buddy Charlie, he's the man knows how to brand. As the Assistant Director of Curriculum Integration and Campus-Based Programs, Laura, take it away.
So yeah, it's day 4 for me in my new position. And so when Bruce emailed and said, you know, I know you've got this assistant director thing, but you know, what's the rest of the title? And I had to actually go look it up. So I brought my position description with me today because I am proving that I'm a lifelong learner and can pivot on a dime. So I've been thinking about these questions a lot. My new computer and my printer had a little tantrum this morning, so I'm just going to go with sharking the ideas I've just heard and echoing them. And then talking about what I've been thinking about for a couple of weeks when I knew that I was going to be approaching a new position, and then I had agreed to be on the panel, and kind of trying to parse what was grad school and what was kind of keeping that training from my days in grad school before me for the last 8.5 years in my position, because it's very, very, very important what you're learning and the support that you've got here, and they're absolutely transferable skills. And so what I wish I had known is what I preach to my undergraduate students, incoming students, first years, and say, we're not asking you to narrow yourself down right now. We're asking you to bring all of yourself to the table, and then we can kind of help you triage. And so what folks have said about your passions are shared, right, in the classroom in a lot of ways, but everybody brings something really unique. And I think I joke about a work-life balance, but it's absolutely critical, which you all know being grad students. But I think mustering the energy to kind of pay attention to that, what's important to you in and outside of the classroom. And so the resources that you have access to, and I would absolutely echo technical skills. Because if you're used to walking these halls and people know, golly, look at that big, beautiful brain. It's wonderful. I like to conversate with that. And then you get somewhere and you can't get out of the cell in an Excel sheet, and people are just, you're this tall, and people are just like, what? Can't you do this? I'm like, well, there wasn't a whole lot of focus during my grad school days. I mean, it was emerging at that time, but I think absolutely taking care of yourself and using the resources. And when you don't know how to do something, own it. Go find it. Go get in a workshop. Make friends with the IT person. They will desktop coach you. They love to share knowledge. Most of the people on the campus do. That's what we have in common. So I would say resources from free swimming pool to libraries to every kind of workshop. But I also bringing the things that are in your life into the classroom instead of sort of hiding it. Oh, by the way, I'm an advocate at the Women's Transitional Care Center. I would have foregrounded that a little bit more with my faculty, and they would have been ready to hear that, and kind of would have helped me to connect with folks outside of my department, because I was very French and Francophone. I was very into my department, so I maybe didn't branch out and meet those people on campus right around me that shared a lot of my similar interests. And so I try again to remember when networking was called meeting people, having fun, hanging out, talking till 3 a.m. I mean, in a professional setting, it's a little bit different, but there are elements of all of that. So I think your connections and using your resources that you have on campus. I wish, this is so babyish, but when I was applying for this job a 3 months ago, I got out a CV I had to just brush the dust off of. And I tell early career professionals all the time, you get in there at least once a month and think what you've done, or look at your calendar and make a list of those things, and then you have nice fodder for a CV. So I would have paid more attention to keeping that current and updated. I think I would have paid more attention to what was going on in the classroom with my peers when I was in grad school, because you're actually developing skills for negotiation, exchange of ideas. We had some darn heated discussions in the classroom at times, and they did not end in screaming fistfights, right? There was a real exchange of negotiation tactics, and so I absorbed some skills that I wasn't really paying attention to. I think that what students can do, again, the conversations that you have on this campus, the exchanges that you have just by chance, people want to help you, right? I want to help you. I am sitting on a panel of people that want to help me, so I think there's a lot of that going around. So it's not walking into a room and being intimidated and these people already know each other, that people will open their arms to include you in that group. So make yourself do it. It's painful. Exchange information. I think for both the academic advisor senior, and my current position, those were emails and texts and messages that I got from just folks that knew me and said, hey, I was on the jobs board, which I tend to love my job, so I'm not on the jobs board very much. So if people don't poke me, I'm not maybe paying attention to possibilities for myself or professional development. So I think that conversation and exchange, sharing your passions and how they fit within the academic context, but how they're very real off the hill, right? So I can research, I pay attention to scholarship on issues of gender, sexuality, sex positivity, globalization, all of these different things on campus, but I'm also out in my community having conversations about that a lot. So one thing that I was able to do during my undergraduate and graduate and current careers is to volunteer in the community. And so if you can't, pay $400 for a grant writing workshop, but you can show up from 11 to 3 in the morning and help your association. That's really, really important. And plus that feeling of impact, of giving back, of doing service, of being involved in community exchange, it's really, really important. So, and those are some of the things that I've been asked about in my interviews, is to talk a little bit more about roles that I've had in community organizations, or connections I might have made with my board members, because they're real big dogs and important, and I didn't know it. I just thought they're great community members out there with me. So, and I think the communications piece, the bringing the conversation to whoever you are around, because you are individual agents for the humanities in every conversation that you ever have, public and private. And so whenever you get when you get the opportunity to exchange that information or those opinions, or just share, I think that's important, and it's developing skills that you'll use, obviously, in and out of your professional life. What skills or knowledge did you acquire during your graduate studies? Again, the research piece that everybody has mentioned, the ability to go out there and vet some information, or say, I read that and it was so interesting. Also complete bunk, and here's why. And I like to think in a friendly and a collegial way, but I don't just accept something, and you all don't just accept something, even if it was written by somebody that you respect, by somebody that's really intelligent. I'm going to look at the second footnote and say, I read that article and that's not what I thought. So I think that research piece. I also have had a chance to be on search and hiring committees in different capacities. So when I was a grad student, I was graduate student representative, and I got to see the faculty interview process. And then and when you're in your overworked and sometimes underpaid profession, it's a lot of work to be on a search committee, and it's a lot of kind of extra, and it is so worth it, because you really, really have an idea of what skills you might want to cultivate, or you might want to develop, and the watching candidate after candidate after candidate say really intelligent things, or being able to ask something about the budget meeting that had just been live streamed about KU. It was really, really impressive, and I copied that, and I have done that ever since. I really, really, really do my research when I'm interested in a position. I think your writing skills, although, a PhD doesn't exactly teach you to communicate in bullet points, which is often what the folks at the top have time to read, right? So if it's below the first paragraph and it's super important, best figure out how to kind of restructure. So, but they are important writing skills. Curriculum development has turned out to be really important in a couple of different positions where I would not have expected it. So have been in a classroom and guided a classroom and managed a classroom, coped with a classroom, turns out to be really, really, really important. A lot in the positions that I've had also, teaching skills are a really, really big negotiating tool, to be able to say, I know how to teach. Obviously, if you can teach, you don't faint at the notion of public speaking, because that's just not an option, right? So you might have had that when you were doing your training in your first week, but you got over that, and you can communicate and impart information in a way that turns out to be really important, because you're often asked to represent your office, and to speak to folks that the university really wants you to make a good impression on. So I think that's really key. Developing curriculum, adapting when anything as simple as 10 snow days or whatever you have to adjust is a big deal that you can present in a very positive way. I think the pros of my career choice, one of the things that I have to say is when I was in grad school, it was just starting to dawn on folks that the professoriate might be an option and not the only option. And so I think that was a little bit in its infancy when I was in my graduate studies. I was also in my PhD program in 2008. And I said, I just got goosebumps. So I don't know if anybody here knows what happened in 2008, but all the bottoms fell out of all the things. And it was a very, very scary time. And we had some very good coaching from our faculty. One of them I remember Caroline Jewer saying, wow, all this means is you're going to have to be really, really good at what you do. And so that, that really inspired a certain set of students. The job that you are interested in, you get out there and apply for it. And so I kind of put my foot in the baby pool in things that I would have thought were closed to me or not. I didn't know about transferable skills in the same way then. So just having that encouragement to get out there and do it. The pros are that I'm pretty much always surrounded by passionate, interested, dedicated and committed people. The cons are the work-life boundary balance that you continue to have to maintain. And boy, do I miss teaching. I just absolutely, I think that's one thing I'm just, I hear a lot. It's anytime I have a chance to get in a classroom, teaching a class for students on probation that's about study skills and campus resources, anytime I have a chance to get out there, I absolutely do that. So I think after all my semesters of whining about grading, what I will do when I had my summer vacation next door, I wouldn't complain in the same way because now I do miss the teaching part. But you have lots of opportunities to pass the torch and assist other folks in the field all the time. So that's kind of similar. So I hope that was only, I'm just like, yeah, I'm a chatterbox.
By the way, Laura, I remember once years ago getting to sit in on one of your classes, and I have no idea what it was about, but I absolutely remember loving it.
Thank you. It's not what you say, it's how you make them feel.
Yeah. Last but not least, we have Katie Ashley. Katie earned her BA in French with distinction because at KU we don't use pretentious expressions like magna cum laude. I learned that when I came here. Like, oh, is this a Midwestern thing? At KU in 2011 and her MA in French 4 years later. Katie has tried more than once to leave KU, only to be pulled back into its orbit. The mighty Jayhawk's power is apparently too much for her to overcome. Since graduating,
I'll address that.
Since graduating, she worked for the International Paralympic Committee headquarters in Bonn, Germany, as a lecturer for our department, as an English teaching assistant in France, and since January, she has been the education program specialist for the Open Language Resource Center and Language Training Center, both housed in EGARC. Katie, take it away.
The first question, what do I know now that I wish I first semester of grad school? I tried to plan a wedding, so don't do that. That was overwhelming, and it didn't last anyway. So, what I wish I know, I've got some bullet points here. A lot of them we've all sort of talked about collectively. One of the things that I did, he said I finished my program in 4 years. I took a year and a half off in the middle of my master's because I did start it, and then I was like, I don't want to be a professor, I don't know what I'm doing. I got, I graduated with my BA in the fall of 2008 or 2011, and then I was like, well, I'm here and I guess I'll go to grad school. I didn't know what I wanted to do at that point, so you can imagine being in grad school and being like, oh, I don't even know why I'm here. Luckily they took me...
Little secret for you, that doesn't make you unique.
That's why I'm telling you, like, you don't need, just because you're in grad school does not mean that you need to know what it is that you're doing with your life. One of the things that I think everyone here has tried to reiterate is that there are all of these things that you can try to learn, that you can try to know while you're in grad school, but honestly, life lessons will come at you whether you want them to or not. And a lot of things that I know now, I would not have been ready to know then. But one of the biggest things that I know now is that there are a ton of opportunities on campus for different opportunities that you can look into. So I loved the teaching part of my job, which is why I ended up teaching English in France and I came back as a lecturer. But I know Usman is doing a FLAS scholarship, correct? One of my colleagues when I was in the master's program, she also did a FLAS scholarship, so she took wool off for a year or semester instead of teaching. So if you're like, I really love all of this stuff, but I know I'm not going to be a teacher, there are other opportunities out there for you.
One of the things that I did when I came back to finish my degree was I realized that I did want a work-life balance, and I knew that grad school was really hard and difficult, and it does take up a lot of your time, but I worked really hard to minimize that and manage that better. And one of the resources that I ended up using was the website LibriVox, which has almost any book that I was interested in up to whatever the 1930 dead cutoff date is for free things. And they read books to you. So a lot of the books on the master's list I would listen to while I was at the gym, or I'd listen to while I was making dinner, or I'd listen to while I was in the car or on the bus. And so this was a way that I managed to chip away at my reading list. And you can do it both in English and French. So that I also got a lot of French practice listening to it or reading along while someone read to me to work on my accent. Because obviously the point of grad school is to finish grad school. I'm sure you guys are all listening to all of this and be like, yes, these are all great suggestions. I have no time for any of this. So what I wish I had known in grad school was how to better manage my time. I would spend 2.5 hours just working on a lesson plan, and then I'd get to class the next day and the computer wouldn't work. So prioritize, do things well, but also make sure that you are living the life that you want to be living in addition to being a grad student. And I know that Bruce will be like, you are a grad student, but do both. Figure out a way to make grad school manageable so that you do have time for these other opportunities, because that is in a large part what will get you into a career. I did not know very well the different job opportunities allowed to me if I had a master's. One of my sort of arguments against getting a master's was that I would be disqualified for a lot of jobs, which in some cases is true, but I also just didn't know the industry well enough to figure out how to use a master's degree to get a good job, to get a career job, right, not just a job. So using some of these job job finders, or what was the website that you talked about earlier? The
Imagine PhD.
Imagine PhD.
Yeah.
I don't know if this was available when I was here, but I definitely would have used it.
It's really good.
To figure out my skill set, to figure out what I wanted to go into, because what I wish I had done better was actually look at job postings, look at different companies or nonprofits and figure out what type of people they are hiring, right? So if they've got a job posting, look at the job posting, look at how many years of experience do you need in this? What type of tech skills would you need for doing that? You'd be surprised at the number of just basic administrative assistant type jobs or administrative support type jobs require you to have 3 years already of office experience for an entry-level position, or that require you to have your tech skills sort of already in place so that you can just sort of jump in day one. So looking at that and then figuring out, okay, how do I start working toward that? And then also realizing that jobs are not jobs. Jobs are careers inside of industries. So one of the things that you are doing as a grad student is you are entering into the industry field of academia, which is, yes, being a professor, but everything else that we do. So we say alt-ac, but really what I do is I work within the field of education and academia. That's my industry. If I were to take my skills and try to transfer them to the nonprofit world or try to work for an insurance company, there are some skills that would transfer and they might interview me, but they would probably also look at that and be like, okay, but you're not in our industry. So thinking about that as you work toward a career, what industry do you really want to be in? Do you want to be in academia, or do you want to work for a nonprofit? Do you want to work for the government? And in that case, do a summer program with the government. If you really want to work in academia, or you really want to work as a teacher, do a summer program where you're teaching, or you're working for the Hall Center or something like this, right? So that you are getting experience in the industry that you're working in. I worked in a variety of different industries. Most of them are not on my CV. This time last year, I was working at a barista making coffee. What can students do now? I did not plan to really have a career in public humanities, and that was my own fault because I didn't really plan to have a career in general. So, because I never knew what I wanted to do, and I still don't. Not only was I working in a coffee shop last year, but I was also preparing to go to nursing school because I had just decided to jump ship altogether and do something completely different, which I've done several times in my life. I also worked as a para for an elementary school at one point. I worked retail, I was a waitress, I lived in 2 different countries. So I am the worst to try to tell you how to prepare for your career. Hopefully you know what that is. What I use in my current position that I love is we do a lot of stuff that's tech heavy. Luckily, they hired me based on my experience and my degree and taught me my tech. So I work up in EGARC, which you guys all know, like, hopefully you know, rents out and loans out tech equipment. They'll come in, they'll set stuff up for you. I don't do any of that. What I use Excel almost exclusively. One of my job descriptions is to help manage our budget. So I work for 2 different federal grants, and so we have to be very careful with our grant money. I distribute all of that to our financial services people. And then also we do workshops in different large events, and so helping to do some marketing for that, which I don't really do, Christian does. Thanks, by the way. But I did take, luckily the SLC is a partner of ours, so, but I did take a lot of these workshops for the tech stuff. So I did an InDesign workshop, I did a Photoshop workshop. I was taught how to use Dreamweaver, which for my position has been super helpful because we do a lot of online curriculum things. And so for me, being able to go in and actually manipulate a website and add things to a website has been really great. So if you're able to manage your schedule enough to take one of these workshops, I was taught it when I got into my job, but if you're just jumping into a position and they expect you to know it. Second to last question, skills and knowledge that I acquired during my graduate studies. One of them is professionality, which I don't think is a word, professionalism. I wanted to be a word, so I actually typed that.
I like it. I actually typed that.
It's like a zombie bite. We're all going to use it in the next week.
We didn't type that in the
It's
text
because
message
you bring
earlier.
personality or professionalism.
Yeah, personality.
Right, come on. I like that.
But how to be professional, I think that for me, jumping into grad school, of course, being an undergraduate, I towed this line between sort of being a good student and being a really, like, sort of being there and being there, where I was a little bit more laissez-faire with stuff. And I did graduate with distinction, thank you. But learning how people in academia or in a good professional world. I've read some people in different industries' emails, and I was shocked at the language that they use, so this isn't everywhere. But how to write good emails, how to be very professional when you're talking to someone for the first time, meeting people, how to describe yourself, describe your position, all of these things. I learned all of that in grad school. I learned how to change the language of the Word doc in grad school, which I wish I learned in undergrad. It would have made all my French papers way easier to do. But this is some of these tech things, right, that you sort of learn along the way. One of the things that I use a ton in my current job is curriculum. So I loved the fact that I had a chance at KU to teach classes in addition to taking classes. A former colleague of mine did her master's in French at NYU, which everyone's like, oh, that's so fancy. It was 1 year and she didn't teach at all. And I actually wish that she had gotten the chance to do that because it's something that I use the most. So for my Open Language Resource Center position, I helped look at curriculum development. So one of the things we do is we do a lot of OER creation. Usman actually helped us with our French project over the summer as one of our student hourly workers. So we're creating a French textbook. We're recreating the Spanish online curriculum for the second year. We're creating a Turkish textbook. And we have all of these faculty members who are the project leaders on these, but of course they get funneled into us. We look at them, we look at the content, we look at structure of it, we look at activities. Does this activity follow correctly? Does it relay, and does it follow the same storyline? So all of these sort of curriculum things that I was taught by Dr. Swanson in my teaching course and then followed through in my own teaching, I use this continually in my current position. So how to teach, how to create curriculum. If you know you want to be a teacher, focus on that. Do the Center for Teaching Excellence. Find a way to get plugged in with them. Talk to people in the curriculum and teaching department in the School of Ed. I mean, there are places on campus that you can go to for more information, for more training, for workshops, different things like that, conferences, etc. And then, like I mentioned earlier, time management and prioritizing. I get sucked into things really easily, and all of a sudden several hours are gone. And I think you cannot do that in grad school, and you also can't do that in your professional life. So if I were to have a very specific deadline, and then all of a sudden I realized that I didn't do what I was supposed to do for the deadline in grad school or career, that's really not an acceptable option. So learning time management and prioritizing, figuring how to do things quickly but also well, right? So the motto, done is better than perfect, was very helpful, because as long as you finish your degree, well done.
Bravo.
Bravo. Not everything has to be, and I'm a perfectionist, so that was something that I really had to work on during my graduate studies, was not doing that to such a degree, and knowing that if something was done and turned in and with the deadline, like, it was good, and if things needed to be adapted later, if it needed to be fixed later, like, we could always go back to it, and that's something that is extremely helpful later on. And then also knowing what needs to be perfect and what does not need to be perfect, sort of knowing that difference between things that, like, just replying to emails saying, like, hey, I got this, I'll get back to you, versus knowing the importance of something and being extremely thorough and doing your research and all of that. Pros and cons of my job. I work in an office by myself almost all day long, staring at a computer, which we've mentioned already. I think Sarah mentioned this, that we all sort of miss teaching, and for me, I enjoy those light bulb moments, but I can also get those through meetings. Like, I love teaching, but what I miss the most is that daily interaction with a group, right? With a group, sharing ideas, bouncing things back and forth. When my job is constantly just reading emails, writing emails, reading emails, writing emails, I can get very repetitive. Lots of computer work. My job is often difficult to describe, which I think with some alt acquisitions that can be the case, right? So if you're a professor and you study a very specific thing, maybe they don't know anything about that thing, but at least you're like, oh, I'm a 16th century French professor, and they're like, okay, good, got it. I am the education program specialist for the Open Language Resource Center and for the Language Training Center, and that describes nothing about my position at all. So what I tell people is I do administrative support work for 2 federal grants, and that's a bit closer. So what I like about my job is that I get to work with a lot of very smart people. On the ORC side, we do a lot of curriculum creation, and so I get to work with all of these faculty members who are creating OER for our center, funded through our center, but I get to look and read Turkish textbooks. I get to look at German curriculum. I get to look at French curriculum. We get to host workshops for teachers. So I'm not teaching myself, but we get to bring them to campus, or we get to provide a workshop. In August we ran a workshop for high school teachers at Missouri State University in Springfield, and there were like 20-some high school teachers that were there getting trained on a specific assessment type. And so even though I'm not the one teaching, I love being able to provide professional development to others. And then for the Language Training Center side, something that I love about it is that we are, it's a very prestigious position, very prestigious center. We're one of 8 in the nation. And we provide language training for military personnel in strategic languages. And I love that I get to help our instructors teach them, but also provide that service for the U.S. And I'm not really a patriotic person, but it's a cool job. I love that I get to experience grant writing and reporting to granting agencies. That's something I never did in graduate school, and they didn't really care that I didn't do that in graduate school. They taught me how to do it. And that there's a lot of, that I have really regular hours. So one of my biggest frustrations with teaching was that it's a job that never ends. Same with being a professor. There's always research, there's always lesson planning, there's always grading, there's always something next that you feel you should be doing. So I always had this like weight on my shoulders of like, I'm done, but I'm not done. In my current job, I show up between 8 and 8:30, I leave between 4:30 and 5, and I took a whole week off 2 weeks ago because I don't have to follow the academic calendar. And I take my holidays whenever I want them, and I told my director, I was like, if you need me, text me. I was like, if it's an emergency, and he goes, what would you do? What would be the emergency? Like I don't have to find a sub. I don't have to call lesson plans. He's like, there's not going to be a curriculum emergency in the next week. It's fine. It's fine. So yeah, pros and cons. Love my job. I wish I got to see more people. I work in West Coast still, so that might be a con.
Definitely a con.
Yeah. We'll see. I guess.
Thank you all so much. Let's open the floor for questions, comments. We've got about 15 minutes. 10 minutes.
Could you guys go around and say your name?
Yeah, I was thinking that too.
What you're doing here?
What are you doing here?
Alexander, why don't you start?
So I'm Alexander. I'm doing my MA in French.
My name is Bridget. I'm doing my Ph.D. in French. I took this class before last year, but I just wanted to be here because Professor Hughes thought it would be good for us. So yeah, I'm happy to be here again.
I'm Nima. Doing my MA in French, and we had the same class before last year, and that's a constant question on everyone's mind, I guess, this question for forever. So.
I'm Rebecca. I'm doing my PhD in French, and I'm part of the class here.
One of the two students from this year's class, with the third on a doctor's appointment.
I'm Usman. I was part of the last semester class.
Last year?
Last year class. I'm doing my, I'm into my second year as a PhD in French.
Okay. I'm the guy who doesn't know what he wants to do with his life right now.
You're not alone.
So, let's see here. I already got a BA in political science and a master's in education. And then as people tell me, I don't know what I want to be when I grow up at 34. Anyway, so now I'm getting another master's in African and African American studies.
What's your name?
Cortland Smith, sorry. Very random guy.
Who are you?
What? Oh, I'm Christian. I do marketing for the School of Languages.
Okay, any questions?
So for those who got a PhD, what was your drive to go do that? Why?
My drive to go to that initially was I wanted to be an English professor. And that's what I thought I really wanted to be. But I think I'm actually much happier as a not English professor.
As a not
As someone else.
Well, it just reminds me of the skit.
Yes.
I took time off after I got my MA, and my first job that was maybe finally toward a career was being a study abroad program coordinator at KU, and I pretty much thought life could offer no more, and I wasn't ever going to do anything besides a knitting class ever again, thank you. But I just, for different reasons, my household, we moved to Seattle, I kind of transitioned into social services, so I worked with housing and homelessness problems and programs in Seattle, Washington. And that was really great, and moved back to this part of the country, again with my household, my best friend, and helped manage a bakery in Southern Illinois for a couple of years. And just still had,
woman.
there you go, and I still had l'Assommoir and Nana on my bedside table, and I'm like, you really can't get anybody to talk about this unless you don't because I could make them talk about it, but I couldn't make them analyze it, and I'm like, what do you like about it? The dog got away. And I'm like, well, me too, but what else? They're like, the dog got away, go to school again. And so, but I wrote to my professors, and I asked about them. If any of you ever knew Professor David Deneen, he said, best ask me if you're going to put me down as a reference or want a recommendation, because I'll tell them exactly what I think. So it's just like, dear Professor Deneen.
Hard to imagine David Deneen saying something like
Woo!
that.
So, but I got a lot of support from faculty members when I checked back in with them, and I applied to the program. And was living life as I did it, and it took a long time for me to wiggle out of here with my PhD. One thing I figured out was I really like classroom collaboration, so I loved everything when I was in the pit with my classmates. And then once it was like, go off and do some research and get your thing going on, they had to start writing me letters like, look, we love you, but get out, get your PhD. So, but it was helpful. But if you hit some bumps or you hit some obstacles or you find that, drive is flagging, there were so many times when, I don't know if I ever really considered walking away because I was just so contrary by that time, but I definitely have proof positive that out in the world, in this field, having that PhD behind your name is a big old deal. And there are grades, right? It's the ivory tower, not for nothing. So I didn't come up through a faculty tenure process. And so that's different than having a PhD and going into administration. There are all the little nuances that you can parse. But having a PhD makes everything better in the land that I live in. So it's a little bit trading currency also for the offices that I work for. So that it has done nothing but open doors for me. And so, I'm not saying I'm agreeing not to die a professor. I'm just saying for this little stretch of the road, I'm doing something I really love, and the PhD really, really helped me get there.
Can I add something to that? I think, especially in higher education, having a PhD, like you said, will open so many doors and lead to more money, too. But then outside of higher ed, I've noticed that sometimes it's a struggle if you have a PhD, because a lot of people will see that and think that they have to pay you so much more money, but you obviously don't understand what their business or whatever is about. And so, like, I know some people that have tried to completely leave higher education with a PhD, and putting their PhD on their resume has made it very difficult. So.
Well, and I think to Katie's point about sort of identifying the industry that you're, sort of the context that you want to create your career within or operate within, and so for me, narrowed it all the way down to higher education, international education, and social services. So for 2 of those, PhD is a big deal. For another one, they don't care. You're not expecting to make any money with it anyway. So one thing I would say, though, and this is not particularly legal for folks to do, but when you have a PhD and you're applying for different jobs on the Hill or in a university setting, there is still sort of the myth that you don't really want this career. You're just going to kind of squat with their office and get paid for a while until you can do your real passion, which is teaching. And so just being aware that that's a conversation that happens and people shouldn't be having it. And you go to training workshops about hiring practices and how you're not supposed to speculate on how the kids graduating from high school or the PhD will impact the longevity of this candidate. It does. So you bridge that gap. You talk about why you have a master's or you have a PhD, and yet this is the most satisfying thing you ever thought about doing, and you'd be real good at it.
Self-advocacy goes a long way.
I agree.
Yeah.
Agree.
Yeah, I was just going to follow up on what you just said. So I was just thinking, when we talk about higher education and maybe basically applying for a job, would you say all your experiences qualified you more, or maybe just because you had a PhD?
One of the things, speaking to your friend that didn't get teaching experience, and I think Bruce, you had mentioned this also, that you have some resources at different universities, but they don't include classroom experience. So it was having a PhD, but it was also having had that student contact. And so for everybody in my office right now, they're hiring, and if you either have to have these years of experience specifically in advising or an advanced degree. And so, when I was first moving into that and saying, well, here's why the skills are transferable, is that I was a point of contact for my students in the classroom, not necessarily because they, by Cortland, because they, no, good. But because they could come to me too, and boy, did they take me up on that. So that kind of interaction and interacting with, while you're stressed, a population that's also very stressed, and guiding that's a big deal. Yeah. So, yeah.
How do you find your industry that you want?
To you, panelists.
I would say it has to be something that you enjoy, because regardless of the job or the career track you choose, if you don't enjoy what you do, it's always going to be rough. So how do you find the industry that you want to be in?
Talk to people.
Figure out what they actually do, what their day-to-day structure is. So, do you want to work Do you want to work for corporations? If you want to work for a corporation, then you need to figure out what type of industries they do. You need to figure out what the impact is. You need to figure out maybe what their demographic is like. I mean, it all sort of leans back to what your interests are and what your purpose of your career is going to be. Because if your purpose of your career is like accolades and money, that's going to be a different industry than if you want to do nonprofit and philanthropy or something like that. I mean, within higher academia and just academia in general, there are all of these different choices. So there are corporations that do curriculum development or do teaching, and it's a corporation. They're for profit. Or you could work for a university where it's not for profit, it's for the ideals of the institution. Or you could work for the government that does teaching and all of this, or be an attaché or whatever have you. So there are different types of jobs in every industry, but the focus of the industry and your skill set's different. So you just have to pick what your interests are and what you want to do with that.
I think a way to figure out what you're interested in and which industries correlate with that is just, there are a lot of people in your life and a lot of people in your life that know other people, and just having conversations with those people in your life. Like when I was looking for career opportunities, Katie has a cousin who works for the unions. Anyways,
yes.
So I just Facebook messaged her, hey, you don't really know me, I'm friends with Katie Ashley, and just started asking her like what she did, what she liked about it, what she didn't like about it. The other thing too is like asking people what they like or dislike about their positions when you're like in like a friendly environment rather than a professional environment makes a huge difference, because they're a lot more likely to be honest. And especially, you know, in interviews I like to ask what's your, you know, things you like and dislike about your job, but I've noticed that that's not always very honest answers, because you're trying to hire someone, you want them to come work in your office. And then, you know, there were other people that I met through friends or my parents' business. They, you know, would work with someone downtown, and I was like, oh, that seems interesting. Like, you know, can I grab a cup of coffee with you or something? But yeah, just getting to talk to people and seeing what they have to say about what it's like working on the ground in that industry, I think can give you a really good idea of at least a direction to go in, right? Like, oh, everybody that works for like these types of organizations says this, and that really doesn't gel with like who I am as a person, so not gonna worry about that. And yeah.
Right. When I say industry, I literally mean like the overall topic of your work. Like, are you in the health industry? Are you a service responder? Like, are you in the like police fireman industry? Are you in the insurance industry? Are you in the service industry, like doing restaurants and stuff? So by being in grad school, almost all of us are immediately put into the academia industry, if you would. But even within that, so Megan's husband has a master's degree in German, and he works for Zoom as a tech support something. Yeah. So he uses
technical support engineer.
Engineer. That's also, I know it's not like assistant. So he has an MA, just like we all do. He didn't go on to do his PhD, but he used his tech skills and he uses his German language skills in his job. So he is both an English support engineer and a German support engineer. So he does both because he has those language skills, but he also did a bunch of tech skills because he worked for an office like EGARC when he was at Arkansas. One of our fellow MA colleagues, she volunteered with Johnson County Democrats when she was in her last year of her master's, and now she works for them full time. So she used her humanities skills to then go into a direction with politics. We had another colleague who got an MA here in French who studied Wolof, and she ended up then going to Michigan and getting a master's in public health with her French skills, and she uses that to look at world public health, not just like local public health. So she did an internship a couple summers ago with World Health Organization in Switzerland. And I'm sure her French came in very handy while she was there. Right? And so this is what I mean by industry. Like, if you can do your MA in French, you can do your PhD in French, and if you decide that you want to be in a different industry or focus on something different, it's not going to hinder you at all, but you have to be able to sort of figure out your own passions and follow them.
I want to just sit here all day and listen to the four of you, but we have run out of time. Usma, Nima, Brigitte, if you're interested, Tuesday's class, we're back over in Watson in the Clark Instructional Center, whatever it's called. And we have Josh Bollock and we have Wendy Shoemaker, and the students are going to be bringing their resumes, their CVs. Josh will be looking at working on your online profile, LinkedIn, etc. Wendy will be doing hands-on work for CV resume. We have space. But for now, thank you so much, panelists.
Thanks for having us.
And a final note, those in the class who got to have Nicole, she emphasized that the most useful networking experience you can have is an informational interview, and she gave some really good information about do's and don'ts if that's what you're going to do. And doing informational interviews with amazing people like this is a really smart thing to do. So there we go.
Also, KU mentoring platform.
Yes, exactly.
Mentoring.ku.edu.
Which we looked at, yes.
I am on there.
I know you are.
You can connect with me.
Yes.
I will help you.
Yes.
Well, I was going to say that same thing. I'm not on any platforms of anything. I'm going to learn about them, but everybody here should feel free to get in touch anytime. If you want to talk with me, if you want to chat about what I do or what I have done, I would be so interested. All you have to do is email me.